Oh, hello there. Just remembering the way transportation used to be. Boy, oh boy, we sure have come a long way in the past 100 years. But I'm forgetting my manners. I'm Horatio S. Earl, but maybe you know me better by my nickname, Good Roads Earl. I wasn't born here in Michigan. I'm from up Vermont way. But I found myself in Michigan selling farm equipment. Little did I realize that my biggest sale would be to the legislature here. I sold them on the idea of good roads. You see, in my travels, I decided that what we needed was a road system that connected every major city and state capital in the nation. Well, we only had 46 states back then, but by gum, this country was growing. There were 76 million Americans, and we had a bold president named Theodore Roosevelt. In fact, in 1905, they started mass producing a toy called the teddy bear, named after him. Well, you've probably already heard that story. I suppose you're interested in a different tale. At the turn of the century, there were 8,000 cars and 10 miles, yes, that's right, only 10 miles of paved road in the whole nation. Actually, those of us who enjoyed travel by bicycle found all those cars to be a bit of a nuisance, but they were taking over, and we knew it. In 1905, Michiganders in 83 counties approved an amendment to the state constitution, authorizing state spending for roads, thus creating the Michigan Highway Department. They named me commissioner, and we went to work. My hard-working crew of 5 was eager to get started. We weren't going to allow that $10,000 budget to burn a hole in our pockets. No, sir, we got started right away. We declared war on the mighty monarch mud who had ruled the road to the exclusion of everyone, and just in the nick of time. A gentleman named Henry Ford was busy building cars, and there were plenty more to come. In 1908, a business called General Motors Company was founded. It's not that everyone could afford one, not at all. A new car would cost you as much as $600. And when you consider gas would tally another 4 cents a gallon, well, it wasn't for your average working man, no sir. The preferred modes of travel continued to be by horse-drawn carriage or bicycle. But we all needed better roads. And in 1909, our new highway department had completed the first mile of rural concrete highway. You know it as Woodward Avenue in Detroit, and I suppose these days that area isn't exactly considered rural. I suspect that road we built there had something to do with that. And the cars, they just seem to keep on multiplying. In 1905, there were an estimated 48,000 cars on American roads. 11 years later, in 1916, there were 2.5 million. As a new department, we wanted to do it better than anyone else. So that's why we were the first highway department to establish a testing lab in 1912 to improve our methods and materials. But our focus wasn't just on creating roads. We realized quite quickly that safety and comfort were also important. That's why in 1917, the first center line on a state highway was painted on the Marquette to Dagoni Road. Simple, you think, but making sure all those automobiles stayed on their half of the road was an important safety innovation. We were also the first highway department to use yellow, no passing lines. But we didn't get around to that until, let's see, 1927. Back at Woodward Avenue, things were getting pretty busy by 1917, so we came up with something called a crow's nest, allowed an officer of the law to sit up and direct traffic. Then one of those law officers got an idea for an electric device that would tell traffic when to go and when to stop. So by 1918, Woodward Avenue had a red, yellow, green light. It was something. In fact, the whole area became a tourist attraction of sorts. And a few years after that, they put up a four-way traffic light, again, the first of its kind. By 1919, things were getting busy. The first state bond program for highways was approved, leading to a 5-year construction program that produced 3,600 miles of state highway. With all that roadway, folks would get tired of traveling. Up in Iron County in the UP, some folks put in a roadside park. It's still there today to allow weary travelers to stop and sit a spell. And speaking of the UP, well, they get quite a bit of snow up that way, and once folks got used to the freedom of going where and when they wanted, they began to want that freedom year-round. In 1922, the first practical snowplow was designed and built in Munising. Not only had we conquered the age of mud, but snow was no longer going to block our progress either. As the system grew, folks wanted the ability to travel even further distances, and nothing, and I mean nothing, would stand in their way. We linked the upper and lower peninsula with a state-owned ferry service at the Straits of Mackinac in 1923. And I believe that's when we truly became one united Michigan. As our needs and demands for a better transportation system grew, so did our need for funding. In 1925, the gas tax was approved, giving us 2 cents per every gallon of gasoline sold in the state. And that same year, our horizons began to expand as we used aerial surveys to help us design our highways. By the 1930s, we were well on our way to connecting all those cities, and we even began looking at connecting to different countries. The world's first international underwater auto tunnel connected Detroit and Windsor, and the Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron opened in 1938. Michigan was welcoming visitors into our state at a record rate. So in 1930, we opened the nation's first state-operated information center at New Buffalo. You all call them welcome centers now. And the first state-owned roadside park opened that same year on M43 east of East Lansing. In the 1940s, we were a nation at war. Michigan, with its automobile assembly lines and well-trained workers, was in a position to help with the war efforts. Once again, the Highway Department stepped in, building the state's first 4-lane divided expressway. It was completed in just 11 months in 1942 and carried workers from the Detroit area to the Ford Motor Company bomber plant in Ypsilanti. But we didn't stop there. That same year, the nation's first urban depressed freeway opened, the Davison Expressway through Highland Park. Remember how those ferries connected Michigan's 2 peninsulas in the 1920s? Well, by the 1950s, that was no longer sufficient for the demand. Folks started clamoring for a bridge. It wasn't a new idea. In fact, the thought first surfaced back in 1884 with an article printed in the Lansing Republican. In 1934, the Mackinac Straits Bridge Authority tried to obtain loans and grants from the Federal Emergency Administration of Public Works, but they were denied, even though there was a report that the late President Roosevelt favored the idea of a bridge. Despite the setbacks, the demand continued to grow, and a group of persistent backers continued to push for the span to be built. On May 7, 1954, the largest bridge construction fleet ever assembled was mobilized on the banks of the Straits and went to work on the 5-mile structure. The $98 million masterpiece was completed and opened to traffic on November 1st, 1957, forever changing the